Queen Camilla thought a compromise would be reached during the last meeting. Rather, Prince William came in with a financial order that was sealed and could not be negotiated. The future king acknowledged that Camilla's independent royal allowance would be cut, subject to an annual review, and stripped of certain personal privileges, while King Charles sat silently next to him. She heard more than just a financial decision. She received a warning that the monarchy was no longer protecting her authority. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. Music. Camilla remained motionless. Then, as she looked at William and wanted to know if he comprehended the insult directed at the Queen, her chair scraped back. The prince remained unflinching. Her independent allowance would be reduced by 40%. Music would be subject to an annual review, and it would only pay for costs directly related to authorized royal tasks. William spoke in a calm tone, but his words were powerful. Official funding for tasks, employees, music travel, and authorized household expenses was known as a royal allowance. However, this command went beyond a straightforward cut. Now, separate consent would be needed for private advisors, wardrobe expansion, unofficial travel, additional appointments, and hospitality bills. Her freedom to operate without interference had been violated, but her title was still in place. Charles remained silent while holding the order next to the hearth. Music. Camilla turned to face him, anticipating opposition, any indication that her husband had not deserted her. Instead, the king lowered his gaze. His silence was more powerful than William's declaration, since it showed that the king had anticipated the song and let his son perform it. The prince clarified that the cut was a component of a larger investigation of the queen consort's power, spending, and privately hired employees. William responded to Camilla's accusation that he was treating her household like a threat by pointing out that the assessment had found expenses that had been approved without explicit boundaries. He didn't refer to them as errors. He referred to them as warnings. When Camilla noticed Charles's initials at the bottom of the document, she froze as she reached for it. The king had not just seen the choice made. Prior to William entering Clarence's house, the royal house where the discussion took place, he had given his approval to the framework. Outrage gave way to betrayal for a single breath. William Rose stated that the allowance cut was only the first suggestion approved by the Crown, the institution represented by the sovereign, and he placed a second unopened file on the table. Then he left, leaving Camilla with a sealed warning and her silent husband. The allowance was the first thing that infuriated her, but what each person in that broken room felt the monarchy still owed them was the deeper pain. The allowance was never just an account full of royal funds for Camilla. Music. After decades of public animosity, it stood for acknowledgement, autonomy, and the security she felt she had earned. But for William, the same permission had come to represent unbridled privilege and hazy power. Music. Between them stood Charles, a king aware of public opinion, a husband desperate to keep his wife safe, and a father aware that his son would soon inherit the throne. After the conference, Camilla stayed by herself, gazing at the directive as if it had altered the significance of every room in her immediate vicinity. She took off her reading glasses, put them next to the document, and informed her private secretary that William had treated her like a worker whose contract may be changed at any time. The allowance was seen by the Queen as evidence that she was not reliant, transient, or decorative. It provided for her household, upheld her responsibilities, and demonstrated the legitimacy of her position next to the king. William had a completely different view. Since the monarchy now relied on fewer working royals, the prince felt that tighter financial management was necessary because every public spending carried more weight. Music. A working royal was a member of the royal family who carried out official responsibilities on the sovereign's behalf. Fewer working royals put more pressure on the remaining members. Discipline did not mean brutality to the future monarch. It was survival. Later, Charles came in and saw Camilla sitting in the dark. She did not get up. The king hesitated before responding to her question about why he had signed the framework without informing her. Music. He acknowledged that he was afraid she would make him decide between safeguarding the institution and defending her before he was prepared to deal with either outcome. Camilla became more enraged. By keeping quiet, she informed him that he had already made his decision. Charles took a step toward her without touching her. The monarch acknowledged that servants had committed the palace to payment before he received multiple financial demands with her permission. Reversing them at that point would have revealed embarrassment and division. Williams was worried about more than just money. Music. He felt that Camilla's expanding advisory network had started to function as a second court, a rival circle of influence that was in competition with his own office. Music. The staff and advisors around a senior royal were known as a royal court, and this one had begun making choices before the king had a complete understanding of them. Camilla insisted on knowing which of her requests had ultimately caused William to turn against her. Charles averted his gaze and remained silent. More was conveyed by that stillness than by any confession. Music. There was one episode that was still too harmful to discuss openly, and it would soon be acknowledged by all in the palace as the real point of no return. A spreadsheet, a budget discussion, music, or William's abrupt urge to impose control were not the starting points of the Allowance conflict. 6 weeks prior, during a secret event at Windsor Castle, a gathering meant to pay tribute to long-serving royal personnel subtly turned into a show of conflicting authority. One overheard conversation, one unsigned payment request, and one decision made without Charles's consent caused the rift that ultimately led to Camilla and William sitting across a table. The Windsor reception was organized by Camilla as a treat for her household members, including trusted friends, new advisors, and charitable representatives. One of the sovereign's primary royal homes, Windsor Castle was utilized for formal events, intimate get-togethers, and times of great institutional significance. The initial budget was small. The guest list then expanded. The cost was greatly exceeded by entertainment, extra security, private transportation, overnight lodging, wardrobe preparation, and a long dinner. William heard sounds from a nearby doorway when he arrived earlier than anticipated. When Camilla told an assistant to put a sizable hospitality expenditure under the sovereign's official ceremonial budget rather than her own stipend, the prince stopped. That budget-funded activities, not private household celebrations, were held specifically for the crown. Music. The distinction was significant, since decisions that had never been authorized as official duties would suddenly be funded by public funds. William came in and inquired as to whether Charles had given his approval for the transfer. Camilla shut the folder before her. She informed him that the Queen did not need the Prince of Wales to review every choice she made. In response, the future king said he was not examining her title. He wondered why a personal expense had been passed off as a ceremonial duty. Camilla's expression stiffened. She said he had made fun of her in front of the employees. William, however, cautioned that unchecked power would ultimately harm everyone. The Queen declined to change the directive. The stillness between them had already turned dangerous, yet he departed without further dispute. Afterwards, William and a senior financial officer reviewed the accounts. The receipt payment was not an isolated exception, according to the documented review. Similar costs had been concealed under general headings, giving the impression that private household expenses are related to official royal activity. The identical pattern appeared on 3 authorization sheets. After reading the copies in private, Charles turned pale when William showed him the last page. At the bottom was a stamp of the king's approbation. However, he acknowledged on tape that he had never seen the paper prior to the addition of his authority. William realized that canceling a single payment would no longer be sufficient to resolve the situation. Knowing that Charles would have to decide between Camilla's wrath and the stability of the monarchy in the future, he drafted a permanent prohibition. His decision was explained by the concealed accounts, but they were unable to prepare him for what the Queen would say when courteous language eventually vanished. Camilla did not let the choice be made in silence. In a few hours, she called William back to Clarence's residence, music, and cleared the room of all assistants. The door shut. With it vanished the meticulous language of royal duty. What ensued was an intense battle about legitimacy rather than a financial dispute. One thought she was protecting the Queen's honor. The other thought he was keeping the crown from deteriorating before it fell under his purview. Camilla had insisted on holding the second meeting without financial officers, secretaries, or legal counsel. She thought that once the conflict turned personal, William would become less assured.